Hi everyone, welcome. It is 4 on the dot. We have quite a few people in the room already, which is great. But just bear with us. We have quite a lot of people joining today, so just bear with us. We'll, as usual, wait a minute or two at least just to let the stragglers in, and then we'll kick off. In the meantime, can everyone hear me? Can everyone see me? Are we okay technically? Lots of familiar names popping up. Welcome, everyone. We were just, the presenters were all in a room just now, making sure everything was working, and everyone is really excited about this event. To the extent that some people are starting to dip into they're skipping to the end of the presentation and starting to dip into the beer. They will remain unnamed. We're sitting on 35, 36, which is pretty good. And for those of you who just joined, welcome. We'll be kicking off very shortly. Yeah, feel free to type in the chat. It's an open chat. I think we're going to kick off. We've got pretty good numbers, and not too many people have joined in the last minute or two. So welcome everyone officially to our next webinar. This is one of our favorites. We do some sort of a tasting. We've done whiskeys, we've done wines, we've done brandies, we've done rums, gins, tequilas. If you're asking yourself why you didn't get included in those, make sure that you speak to your Torito account manager. But they've been awesome. We always have Sean Guns, who takes us through the tasting part of the evening, and he is absolutely brilliant. I think everyone here will vouch for that. The way it works is that the first hour is technical. We're going to teach you guys, hopefully teach you guys some new things. We're going to do some demos. As with a bunch of our events, we do tend to focus on the more technical people. We don't deep dive, but it is definitely not, these sessions are not for end users. So if you are lost or confused, please make notes. This session in particular has a bit of a time constraint. Even though it seems like a long session, it goes very, very quickly. So we ask you to please write down any questions or notes or suggestions or whatever you have, and we will try and deal with it at the end. Sometimes we don't have time at the end, and if that happens, please email us or drop it in the chat, and we're going to get back to you at some stage or as soon as we can. So quickly, this event obviously is at the end of the event, we're going to talk about beer. It's a good idea for those beers, and we asked one of our experts just now what to do, but it's a good idea for those beers to be in the fridge for now. You can bring them out at 5 p.m. I'm the only one that has permission to drink my beer early. I got that permission earlier. The technical side this evening is about Defender, Entra, ID, Intune, and Purview. And to be honest, I think we bit off more than we can chew. All of us have been going through the presentation for the last couple of weeks, and it is an enormous amount of content. Gary Ackerman is going to kick it off. Some of you will have seen him before in some of the other webinars, but we are going to try and squeeze in a quick intro to, or not an intro, a bit of a demo from each of those areas of Microsoft and explain why they work together so well and why they're all important and why they need to be looked at in conjunction. He's joined by Richard and Luke from the Aughentic team, who are going to jump in at various stages to do some demos. And like I said, if you've got any specific questions, please just keep them written down, and we'll try and deal with them later. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Gary, who's going to kick things off on the technical side. Everyone, welcome again. We really appreciate your time, and I hope you enjoy.
Thank you very much, Colin. I'm just loading up the presentation here. Just give me a thumbs up when you can see it. Takes a few seconds. There's some big images in there. There we go. Should be able to see it. There we go. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk to you today, and thank you very much everybody for giving up your afternoon. I know beer was the ultimate enticement, and when Terita asked me to present, and I found out the context and the topic, I was probably one of the most excited people. So I think they knew they were going to have a willing presenter without having to ask too many questions. But welcome everybody, and thank you very much for your time. As I mentioned, I'm going to be presenting, as Colin mentioned, I'm presenting along with two of my colleagues, Richard and Luke. They're going to be handling the demo side of it. I'm very pleased to tell you today is a whole lot more show than tell, but I'm going to get through a little bit of an intro before they get into the demos. Over the last few months, we've been on a little bit of a journey, and for those of you that have seen me in previous Bytes and Bytes presentations, you'll know that we focused on individual products and their strengths and features and how they each bring something to the party when you look at your security infrastructure, your posture. We've dealt with all of those before, and I'm reliably told that if you want to go and revisit those videos are all still available on the Terita YouTube channel. Just reach out to your Terita contact to get directed in where you can access those. The journey itself has been quite an interesting one, because we've been watching a lot of evolution in these products, and we've been looking a lot of the evolution around the context of why you want to implement those products. But one of the common elements that you found in every single presentation that we've given is that you need to do this because we've got to prepare for the rising importance of AI in organizations. And I can quite honestly tell you that a year ago, while we all realized the importance of AI, the feedback that we were getting from our customer base was a little indifferent. I can honestly tell you over the last couple of weeks, I've had the same sort of feedback. The feedback that I'm getting is that customers are now saying, well, hang on a second, the stuff's actually becoming quite useful. And I've actually started to find a whole bunch of use cases that are now really, really valuable to my organization. So you're finding that we've entered the phase of maturing of IT, and that we're getting to the point where IT is going to become a lot more pervasive in our organizations and the organizations that we deal with. And as a result, you can't rely on security through obscurity anymore to keep you safe from either internal attacks or external attacks. So the preparedness for AI has become a foundation of why you would want to consider these products, and this initiative of having this foundation implemented in your organization. Coincidentally, and it's quite a pleasant coincidence, we have found that preparedness for AI is also preparedness for compliance. Now, we've been talking to organizations for years about compliance, and as mentioned in previous presentations, I don't think anybody gets excited about compliance. It doesn't really produce any sort of value that's tangible in the short term. It certainly keeps people out of jail if you've got it in place, but at the end of the day, trying to sell compliance for the sake of compliance is very, very difficult. What we have found, preparedness for AI is the same as preparedness for compliance. So you get double the benefit for a single initiative. And that's something that when we've presented this to customers, that they've reacted and responded very positively. I went and I looked for, and I found this reference architecture from Microsoft, which gives quite a detailed view of the products and processes that companies would need to implement or can implement to underpin their security posture and or foundations. Now, you don't have to subscribe to all of them. It really does depend on what your focuses are and what your priorities are. But you'll see that this is quite a noisy diagram. And one of the things that we wanted to present today, and what we've been presenting over the last few weeks, is that while this architecture represents the foundation of Microsoft's initiative around security, there are 4 cornerstones to this. And if you look carefully in the diagram, you see them at multiple locations, particularly when you look for Defender. It seems to be the one element that you find in a variety of different use cases. And as a result, you'll see that it's probably the one with the most glue between all the different elements. And if that is the foundation of a security posture, these 4 products are the cornerstones: Microsoft Entra, Microsoft Defender, Microsoft Intune, and Microsoft Purview. You'll see it later on when Richard gives you a bit of a view in the Defender portal, but there is a view that you get in terms of the pillars of protection, and it talks about users, devices, data, information, and all of these are assigned to certain roles within these applications, and they all have very specific roles when it comes to underpinning security with each of those different contexts. And we're hopefully today going to give you a little bit of a view as to how they all work together. And that today is actually what this presentation is all about. It's not about going into features of any specific product on its own. It's to show how they all work together. And my colleagues have got some very interesting scenarios that they're going to present to you from a demo perspective. When looking at the products, the one I consider the most important is Microsoft Entra. It is as the name implies, it's the entry point to an organization. It's the entry point to accessing data. It's how you control access to information. It's how you enroll devices or analyze devices in your organization. It also gives you the ability to create groups for the purpose of role-based access control. But one of the more important features of Microsoft Entra that we're going to demo to you today is the ability to use it as a platform for the authentication onto non-Microsoft clouds and platforms. We've got a few customers over the last few months that have started to ask us about using Entra as the single sign-on authority for platforms like Google, AWS, and as you can see from the graphic, Salesforce is also an immediate provider that Entra can be used for, and obviously the whole of the Microsoft Cloud. What a lot of people don't know, though, is that from a custom application perspective, you can also use Microsoft Entra as your SSO provider through very low-cost mechanisms that are made available to all of the developers. And we've done so very successfully for customers in the past. So this gets you to the point where you have a product that will allow you a single point of contact and enforcement to apply to multiple clouds, multiple applications, multiple platforms. The second most important, the second application, and I also think from a security perspective, probably the most important one, is Microsoft Defender. And you'll notice from that reference architecture that we showed earlier that you'll find Defender in a variety of different places, from endpoint protection to cloud to application interfaces. Defender is Microsoft's fabric that is woven into almost everything that operates in the Microsoft Cloud. It is also responsible for generating and analyzing and presenting the telemetry of all the security interfaces that come into an organization, and it will also entertain third-party telemetry as well. So it's a vitally important part of the security and protection mechanism that you need to implement from an organizational perspective, and it works hand in hand with both Intune and Entra to apply its capabilities. The third element, third cornerstone, is Microsoft Intune, and its primary focus is device enrollment and management. And when it comes to looking at an organization from a security perspective, the devices that users use are vitally important, and the enforcement of policies on those devices, and also the enforcement of policies in general, sits within the Intune scope and its purview. The important part, though, is that, and you'll see when you look at Microsoft Purview as a solution scope as well, when you implement Purview, one of the first questions that gets asked is that you need to be able to define your data estate. And we find that without Microsoft Intune, that's virtually impossible to do. You need to find all the devices that your users could be accessing information with or storing information on. And if you don't have a tool, an MDM tool like Microsoft Intune, it's impossible to do. And as a result, you'll find that Intune and Purview work really, really well together to provide you with that diagram or that information about your data estate. The fourth product and the fourth cornerstone is a Microsoft Purview. And I was telling the team that I was looking for some interesting, updated, modern imagery to highlight the role that Purview has been playing. Because if you looked at Purview 6 months ago, its role was very much around compliance and the enforcement of compliance and the auditing of compliance and providing information to show that you are compliant with certain metrics or certain templates or certain regulatory platforms. But you'll notice in this one, it's got Copilot inserted, and this is Microsoft's updated imagery. And I think everybody suddenly started to realize that the role of Purview has now gone beyond just the compliance bearer. It has now started to be used from a pure information protection and data loss protection mechanism, both from internal threats and external threats. Now, in the past, this used to be under the guise of, well, if the user mistakenly attempts to do something. But something that we've been trying to highlight for all of the people that have attended these sessions in the past is that when you introduce AI into the mix, as I mentioned earlier, the aim of using obscurity for security no longer applies. If there is a loophole in your data security or a hole of some sort, the AI will find it. And as a result, it is now more important than ever that a product like Purview is used to protect the information and data that you have, and also protect against the potential sharing, either intentional or unintentional sharing of information outside of your organization. So that is the intro that I'm going to be giving you today, and I'm going to step aside and allow my colleagues now to show you how these products all work together. So Richard and Luke, if you don't mind, let me hand over to you.
Thanks, Gary, and good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the demo part of the presentation. So I'm sharing my browser. Please just confirm that you guys can see it. You should be able to see the Entra ID. I'm getting a nod from a few people. Thank you. So I'm just going to highlight what Gary has said. Yes, Entra ID is the old Azure Active Directory. So as we would expect, we have all of our users and groups and all of the devices, and we'll talk about the devices just now. But we would expect to see all of our users that either are created on premise and synced up through Azure Active Directory synchronization, or we have users that are created in the cloud. And effectively, what we're seeing here is a couple of users that we've created in Entra ID. And to keep with today's theme, I've got beer demo. So beer demo I've created and linked. And what we're going to show you here in this first little bit of the demo is how we actually can log on to a Google Cloud using an account created in Microsoft's Entra ID, synchronized from Microsoft's Entra ID with its password to Google. And then when we go to the Google portal to log on, we actually see the Microsoft Entra ID prompt come up and log the user on. And I'll explain the reason why this is very important in terms of the reducing of your attack surface by only having one user account that you're managing, the fact that you don't have users going and creating different user accounts and different platforms, typically all with the same password, and when one gets compromised, they're all compromised, and the administrative nightmare of trying to go and look after those user accounts in all the different platforms. So effectively, what I've got here is I've got two user accounts. I've got Beer Demo and Beer Live, and you can see they've got logon names and they've got email addresses and so on. The only difference between the two at the moment is that Beer Demo has been added to a group, and that group is the group that we are using to synchronize to Google. And so if I jump to my Google admin portal And sorry, let me just get rid of that. And we can see beer demos here, but there's no beer live. And we can do that by just checking, do a search quickly for beer. And we can see we only have beer demo. So what we're going to do quickly is we're going to go and jump to Beer Live. And what we're going to do is we're going to add Beer Live to our Google group. So we're going to add the membership and we're going to add it to the Google Sync group that we've created. And this Google Sync group effectively is how we've set up our Google Sync between the two, between Microsoft going to Google. So an account will only synchronize if it's a member of that group. So effectively, what that means is if we were to create this account in Active Directory on premise, we could add that account to this group, and then it would sync up to Active Directory or Entra ID in the cloud. And from there, it would sync across to Google. And this is on a timer, so typically it takes every sort of 40 to 45 minutes for that to sync across. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go and do a provision on demand. And all a provision on demand does is so I'll just show you the overview of this. All it does is that there's a scheduled sync, as I mentioned, and we're now going to come along and we're going to go do a provision on demand, and we're going to tell it to synchronize our Beer Live account quickly for me. Now I remember why I clicked on this because it is a bit slow. Beer. I'm going to choose our Beer Live account and I'm going to say provision. And what we're going to see is that Beer Live account now, it's going to go and check its membership. It's going to check various things, and it's come along and it's looked at the attributes and it's run a little flow. And if I go and actually now do a refresh on my logs, I'll be able to see from Entra ID that account actually synchronized across, which is all very nice and great. So there's Beer Live, and we can see determining, oh dear, okay. This does sometimes happen because it sometimes takes a little minute for it to actually work out that it's in that group. So I did anticipate that this might be let's just give it a few minutes. But in the meantime, just so that you can see what we're talking about, and we'll come back and show you that's once created in a minute. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to open an in private browser so that I can, in private browser, I am going to pull up my notes on the other screen just so that I can quickly jump into the Google workspace, and I am going to log on as a user. And what we want to see here is that we are logging on to a Google workspace.
Richard, just be aware
we
that
can't
you
see
can't
it.
see
Yeah.
your in private browser.
Oh dear, sorry.
You have to share your whole screen.
Sorry. You know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to do it in another tab. Let me do this. Can you see it now?
Not seeing any.
No, you're not sharing anything.
Sorry, guys. I think it hit my end share. You're saying just share my screen. Apologies. Can you see it now?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now we're going to the Google workspace. We're going to log on to a Google account. And with that Google account, what we're going to do is we're going to log on using a user account that was created in Microsoft 365, or actually an Entra ID, sorry. A license has been allocated to it. And it's now prompting me for that. And you'll notice that what it's done is it's taken me from a Google logon page to a Microsoft prompted logon page. And when I put in that user account, it's now going to ask me for the password for that account. And putting in the password, it's now going to prompt me for my multi-factor authentication, again, from the Microsoft system. And when I put in that code that we are on my Microsoft Authenticator app, it's now going to log me on using the Microsoft authentication system in Entra ID. And then once it's authenticated me, allow me access, if I'm allowed it, to the Google account. And there we go. Welcome Beer Demo. So as you can see, I'm now in my Google account and I've been authenticated using the Microsoft Entra ID. So that is really, really neat. One of the key things that's important about that is when we are looking at these the user accounts inside of the Entra ID, we can start also doing some very, very nice components to it. So, for example, the AI engines inside of our Entra ID and Indefender and things like that are constantly looking out on the internet and observing where user accounts are trying to be logged on from. They're also looking on some of the sites that are in the dark web or in unsavory places to see if user accounts have been that pop up that match any user accounts inside of the Microsoft ecosystem, and to see whether those user accounts have been published with passwords. So, for example, that would then flag automatically as a risky user. So if we look at a risky user, what do we mean by a risky user? A risky user is a user that the system has identified as potentially having a flag against it. So if we look at an example of a user here, and we're using Eric as the example, so on the 19th of April, it was observed that some leaked credentials appeared on the internet for a user account of Eric G at argantic.coza. The system immediately marked it as a high-level risk. So this can happen in the middle of the night. No one's sitting watching the system 24/7. Now this user gets marked as a high risk. What happens is we also can look at the conditional access component inside of Entra ID, and we're able to have conditional access policies running continuously on our system. And for example, this one here where we have a sign-in risk policy. And what we're doing here is we're looking at it and we're saying, for all users in the organization, what we want to do is we want to identify some conditions, and the conditions that we're looking at is any user account that's marked as medium and high, or any sign-in risk that's marked as medium or high. And what do we want to do with it? Well, we want to do some sort of granting of access, either denying, blocking the access, or in this case, we'll grant the access, but we will force a multi-factor authentication challenge response with that user account. So in other words, the user can still work, but even if the password is compromised, the multi-factor authentication challenge response will initiate. And that happens even if the user is already being authenticated against the device, and it's within, like, for example, we set those 30 days or those 60 days or those 90 days that the person doesn't have to be challenged. They will automatically now be challenged every time they log on. And what's really nice is that you can even put this on report only for some rules that you create, so that you can get an idea of if you're blocking people from actually doing their work, or if you and once you know that it's going to work properly, or you want it to work properly, you switch it on and off you go. So that's an example of reducing your attack surface by using a single account for a user to log on to multiple cloud services, Microsoft and Google in this case. It also shows how the system can identify user accounts that potentially are high risk. And then from that, it can actually create conditional access policies that will either block the user or allow the user, should they meet certain requirements, to access the system. And inside of Entra ID, as we see all of this, we're going to start seeing certain components of the Entra ID popping up in other areas. So for example, if I jump to devices, now we will see a list of the devices in the organization. We'll see certain information about those devices coming up inside of Entra ID, but that information has actually been collected because the devices have been onboarded via Intune. And at this point, Luke, I'd like to hand over to you to start with an Intune demo.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. So Richard has gone through Entra. Again, our aim for the day is to do less demos of all the individual platforms and more show how they link together and how they form your data security estate. So in that demo that you saw with Richard, we have been creating user accounts. In Entra, we have the ability to set conditional access policies, and we have the ability to define and set groups that users can be enrolled into. And as you will see, as we go through each of the different components, those same users, groups, and device objects follow us. The little metaphor we give is we are jumping between portals, so it might be a little bit confusing. when you first open all of these portals, go through them. However, because we use the same user set, the same entry point, which is Entra, there is familiarity between all of the portals. So the little metaphor we use is we're doing multiple activities. Maybe you can see it as different sports, but the ball is staying the same between all of them. So inside of the Intune Admin Center, which is the portal I've opened as well, you can see here, if we go down to conditional access, we see that same view that Richard just demoed with the same sort of policies. The reason why we highlight conditional access in terms of a security deployment, which is what we are focusing on today, is conditional access has actually become a very important tool to use within an organization. Most organizations, when we first do an Office 365 deployment, they rely on the built-in MFA of the tenant. The problem with this is it's very binary. It's on or off. Enabled or enforced, the only difference between those two is that it's been switched on for the user. That's enabled. Enforced means the user has actually registered. Now, this leads us to holes when we reach complicated scenarios. So an example we can give, we recently assisted an organization who came to us. The CEO was very insistent. He had too many devices. MFA was too much of a problem for him. He always didn't have his phone on him. That was getting the authenticator app. He would lose his phone, etc. And IT basically lost the war, and the CEO managed to get his MFA turned off. Now, switching to a conditional access policy, which we assisted them to do, enabled us to have more options. So basically what we did is we looked at his devices. He had 5 of them, and he used his iPad the most frequently, and he always had his iPad on him. So now, instead of having to switch the MFA off, as Richard showed, we have a bunch more options within the policy, and we were able to say, if he logs in from the iPad, do not ask for a MFA challenge. So in other words, now instead of his entire account being compromised, an attacker would both have to get his username and password and actually have access to his device. So it is quite a common thing these days where we're actually moving customers off of just the standard binary on and off and moving them over to conditional access, where we just have a little bit more customization and options. All right. Richard is about to take you through the Defender portal. So the other thing I want to highlight in the Intune portal, just from a security aspect, is sometimes all of these different tools can be overwhelming. Sometimes some of us use one of the portals extensively. Sometimes we use all 4 to a minimum degree. So one thing to highlight is just a compliance policy. So before we get deep into security updates, configuration profiles, reducing the attack surface, a good place to start is just to create a simple compliance policy. The reason why we do this is it enforces a minimum standard. So we can say, if a device were to connect to our network and need to interact, what is the minimum standard that we require? So it's a good starting base. So for Windows devices, we can say, does Defender need to be on? Does it need to be configured? We can also give certain things. What version of Windows do we allow to communicate on a network? If you look at the stats, there's still a surprising amount of Windows 7 and Windows 8 devices floating around. Maybe we have a policy where we allow staff to join their personal devices to the network, and we don't want unsupported devices connecting that have known vulnerabilities. So using a compliance policy, we can go into these settings and basically just decide on a minimum standard. All right. So this is the Intune portal. We are going to go into how we actually use the Intune portal to start closing down holes, tightening screws, and reducing the attack surface of your organization. But to just frame that in a better way, Richard is going to jump into the Defender portal and show us how we go and find out what those holes actually are. Back over to you, Richard.
Thanks, Luke. So let me share my screen again, and hopefully it's popped up correctly this time.
Yep, we can see it.
Oops, let me just move you guys out the way. Okay, so while Luke was talking, just to show you after a couple of minutes, this then started to import the user, just to finish off, and we can see all the nice green ticks for the Beer Live account going through. And then when we're able to go and look at the provisioning log, we see that the provisioning log shows that it's all nice and hunky-dory, and then hitting a refresh on the Google side, we can now see that Google Live is there, and we can see that it hasn't yet signed in, but Beer Demo signed in 5 minutes ago. So very, very, very rich logging, and also showing us how that goes through. So moving on to the Defender portal that Luke's just introduced for us, there are two main things that I'd like to show you in the Defender portal when we land on the home screen and the home dashboard of the Defender portal. So first of all, you can also add, as Gary mentioned, telemetry to be entered into here from other products, for example, Sentinel and your Active Directory identity management component that would sit on your Active Directory compute servers at the office or on-prem, and various other integrated devices that can send their telemetry and reporting into Defender. And one of the key things that we look at here is we look at the fact that we continuously want to reduce our attack surface. And to reduce the attack surface, one of the simplest ways to do this is to look at our security score. So in the 4 pillars or 4 cornerstones that Gary mentioned earlier, and if you look at most of the components that talks about, we are looking at protecting 4 separate areas, and those are your identity, your device, your data, and your apps. And as you can see on the security score, it's looking at all 4 of those, and it's looking at a score out of 100% that you're getting on each one. And effectively, if we go to the security score and we go down and we say we want to improve our security score, what we're going to find is it's going to give us recommended actions. Now, those recommended actions that it's going to list are as a result of the telemetry it's getting back from all the different areas of the AI engines, how it's comparing those devices that have been enrolled in Intune into the operating systems that they have, the authentication types that we're using, and so on and so forth. And it's going to come back and it's going to say, these are some of the recommended actions that you should take, and it also ranks them. Now, some of these, they might exist because you have legacy apps running in your environment and you cannot switch them off. But effectively, when you start looking at these, they actually make a lot of security sense. And again, this is to start reducing that attack surface, and improving your security score also reduces your device vulnerabilities. So all of these items that come back, yes, most of them you set inside of Intune. So Luke's going to show us a little bit just now about how you would take one of these, and how potentially inside of Intune you would look and say, okay, this is where we would configure it. This is how we test it. Again, you don't have to enable it. You can look and see what the effect would be before you enable it. But if we look at the security score, we can see that all of these different recommendations, and I mean, it's just listing the first 200 for me here. So this is quite in depth, and effectively a fantastic tool to help us understand where it is we should be concentrating our efforts to protect our users at their devices, their data, and our applications. The next thing I'd like to show you is when we look at the Microsoft Defender, and I'm just going to jump back to the home screen, it also gives us telemetry of what is happening inside of our organization. So it can tell us devices that are non-compliant, and those are the compliance policies that have been set up inside of Intune, and we can decide how we want to take active with it, what action we want to take it. It can show us whether something's affected by malware, and that's popped up now. So that's something obviously we're going to want to remediate. And it's saying we've got 1 active and 1 remediated, so we can look at that. We can also look at user accounts that are at risk. So that would take us back to the Entra ID, and we would see that account where Eric is still marked as a high risk. And then also it can show us devices that are potentially at risk. So my example person this demo is Eric. And so effectively what we're going to do is we're now going to go and view the details of the device. And effectively, if we look at the devices, we can see that the one that's of high risk as we scroll across to the right is Eric's device. It shows us his exposure level, and at a glance, we can see what operating system and so on is running on the machine. Drilling down into the device, we can start getting some more information about it. And effectively, we can even go and look and say, okay, well, what are the security recommendations? Why are you saying that this device has got a high risk? And we can see under the security recommendations very quickly at a glance, there's lots of Microsoft updates that haven't run. And as a result, there's some vulnerabilities that this device potentially could be exposed to. We could look at this and go, hold on a second, this is a problem, and we immediately want to isolate this device from the network. We can then click on the 3 dots up here, and we can actually go and isolate the device. Now, I'm not going to actually do that at the moment. This is we've kept this device like this for our demo today. But effectively, what we would do here is we would isolate this device from the network. It can't then go to the internet. It can't see anything on the network, nothing. It can't go to a server and do a lateral attack. It can't try and use cache credentials from an administrator to move that an attacker would use to move laterally to try and get control of more devices on the network. But what it does allow is it allows the device to communicate to the Defender portal. And as a result, we can then continue, even while it's isolated, to try and remediate, or we would use the virus scanning. We can force it to run updates and so on and so forth, so that when it's actually remediated, we can then continue and reintroduce it into so take the isolation away, and the user can then safely continue on the network without us being compromised. So as you can see, a very rich and very comprehensive tool, and we've just touched 2 components inside of this, but effectively using that secure score is linking us to the Intune portal. And one of the things that we actually see in the Intune in the Defender portal is under the settings how we actually link it to these different portals. So if we look at the endpoints, and effectively we're looking at the endpoint settings, we can go and enable or disable various different components. And just to give you an idea, over here, we actually have a Microsoft Intune connection that connects our Defender portal to our Intune environment. And on that, I'm going to hand back to Luke.
Awesome, thank you. So just a quick recap where we are in the story. We started off with Entra, just to show everyone how we manage identities. That was one of the core pillars of security. We then jumped over to the Intune portal, just to show how we can create a baseline compliance. We also showed the conditional access so that you can see that we are using the same policies that are spread throughout the entire Microsoft environment. What Richard has just shown us is where do we go and find these holes? Where do we find data and telemetry inside of our organization? And now we're jumping back to the Intune portal now that we have that telemetry, now that we have that information, and we need to know, and we know what we need to close. Again, Intune is the portal we use to go and start tweaking and configuring those things and closing those holes. So we're going to switch over to the endpoint security side of the Intune portal. As Richard mentioned, we are connected. So he's gone in the security side, he's gone and switched on the connector. And how we basically then go and pull all the devices in is you'll see we have an option here under endpoint security called endpoint detection and response. It will give us some telemetry. It will show us that the connector is online. And basically all we would do then is to just go and create a policy to onboard all of our devices and start sending that telemetry over. All right, so this one is very basic. We don't have any settings to go through. It's just basically whether this is an onboard or an offboard. Offboard is important. Sometimes you do have a device that's leaving the network. You don't want the old data muddying the telemetry, so you don't want an alert saying this device has updates that are older than 30 days. And the reason being it just hasn't been switched on in 30 days. So we're getting false positives. So an offboarding option is available as well. And once we get to the assignments, you'll see that Again, we're using the same identities, the same group setup and Entra, so that familiar ball is coming across with us across all the different portals within Office 365. All right. So now we have a list of tasks to do. Richard showed us the recommended actions. For those of you that were in the Intune demo, you will remember that I mentioned that all the low-hanging fruit is in an attack surface reduction policy. So in our experience with helping clients, once they've onboarded devices, generally about 10 to 15% of your score is sitting in this one policy. So we would again go to attack surface reduction. We would want to create a policy. We would select the profile and we would say attack surface reduction rules. Now you'll see when we get in here that there is a lot of settings, a lot of options. If you're not familiar with these, don't panic. Microsoft does use tooltips. They're quite descriptive. So you could go ahead and read through these as you switch things on and off. And if you're unfamiliar with it, or if you get stuck, just reach out to your Tarita representative and they can assist you with these policies. All right. If that step is a little bit too far, let's just say that you are new to Intune. Another nice thing to use is just a security baseline. So what this does is it allows you to add a base level of security. It's not too tweaked, it's not too customized, but it is something that you can go while I'm figuring out the portal, while I'm learning all of these tasks and how to close all of these holes, I would like to put something in place to give me a certain level of protection. And what you can do then is to just go to the security baseline, look at the baseline that you want to do. Let's say it's for devices for Windows 10 and later, and then go and assign this to a test group of users, see how it reacts, and then go and deploy it to your entire organization. Then what you can do is, as you learn the portal, as you become familiar with it, and you start making your own policies and your own tweaks, you can come back later and switch the baseline off. And then in that learning phase and in that period where you're getting familiar with it, you did at least have a level of protection. Another important aspect from a security side is to have an antivirus profile. So Windows 10 and above actually comes with Defender baked into the operating system. However, it is in an out of box state. So it is in a template. It is doing a level of protection, but we don't want to leave it at its baseline. We do want to come into Intune, create a policy, and configure all the settings that would match with the needs of your organization. So again, very familiar as is across all of these portals. All the wizards are the same. You have tooltips under the configuration settings, which you can go and research at your own speed. And once we get to the assignment tabs, we're using the same groups, the same users that Richard demonstrated inside of the intro demo. All right, so the last parts that we will highlight here is disk encryption. This pops up quite often in your secure score. So you've secured the devices. Have you started to secure the data? So this is to handle BitLocker, and you can see we also have options for the built-in firewall. Once all the low-hanging fruit is done, we do still want to start ticking that score up. We do still want to start closing those holes. Just to mention, it is highly unlikely that we will ever get to 100% secure score, purely because it is a fine balance between closing holes, tightening screws, but not so tight that the users are locked down and they're unable to perform their jobs. So we will always look to improve the secure score. However, it is very rare that we'll get to 100%. So let's say we've done the attack surface reduction, we have done the antivirus, and we still believe there's some score to go. The other common place where we will go into Intune to start closing these holes is under the devices, and then you will see there's a configuration section. All right, so these policies are basically almost like for like with GPOs. Back when Intune launched, there wasn't really full feature parity. There was quite a lot of things you can do through group policy objects that you could not do through Intune. But over time, Microsoft has actually closed that gap. And in fact, in some areas, there are things you can do in Intune now that you cannot do in group policy. So what we would go ahead and do is create a new policy. We would select the platform. So in our case, we're just going to use Windows 10 and later as an example. And then when we get to here, we have three options. I'm going to highlight two just for the sake of time. So the first thing to look at is a template. Why we would use a template is if you're familiar with GPO, there is hundreds of thousands of options to choose from. It might be a bit daunting to go and find the right property, so we can go ahead and choose templates, and then we can look and see that Microsoft is actually bunched in a whole bunch of settings under group names. So let's say in the Defender portal, the recommendation Richard was looking at mentioned Defender. We can then go ahead and choose the Microsoft Defender for endpoint template, knowing that the setting we're looking for is most likely in there. All right. If there is no template that we can see, we can go ahead and switch it to a settings catalog. The nice thing about this is, even though it is a list of all the settings, it is searchable. So we can go ahead to add settings. And while it's an overwhelming list, we can search for a setting directly. So let's say Richard opened the Defender portal. He looked at the top recommendation was to configure auto run. So we can just select that in the search bar. We can go ahead and click search, and we'll go and pop up with a list of all the places that we can go and configure auto run. Now, for those of you that were still in IT around the days when we had floppy disks, when flash drives were used quite often, what auto run was if you had an exe sitting on that flash drive and you plugged it in, it would give a pop-up for the user to say, we've detected that there's an exe file sitting on this external drive. Would you like to run it? Now that is a security hole. Sometimes users have muscle memory of just clicking yes and not checking what that exe is. It could be that there's been a virus placed on that drive, so we can go ahead and choose the option to set the default behavior. We can enable it, and we can say do not execute any auto run commands. This setting will now apply to the devices that we assign in step 4. Windows Defender will go and pick up that this configuration change has been made, and it will credit the score to you to say this hole has now been closed. You earn the points in your secure score goes up, and we can move on to the next recommendation. So that is just a nice quick demonstration of how the Defender portal is feeding into your Intune portal. It's giving you the information of what we need to do. We're going to do the action inside of Intune, and all of the device objects and user objects that we are applying these policies to are all pulling through from Entra. So the last portal we are going to take everyone through is the Purview portal. Now, at this point, I am cognizant of the fact that I could be enemy number 1 to all of you. I think the only thing in between you and 6 cold beers is the rest of this demo. So we are going to truncate this a bit. For those of you who've used Microsoft Purview, I think you realize that we could spend an entire hour just defining it. So we are not going to run through all the objects and how to put Purview in place. We are just going to highlight the concept behind it and why is it important. And then obviously, if it piques your interest, or if you're looking to actually do a full deployment again, you can just speak to a Terita representative. So why Purview is important is we are looking to protect the data. The 2 most important aspects in Purview, as mentioned by Gary earlier, is your data loss prevention and your information protection. So the 2 differences between this is the first one is we're trying to prevent data from leaving the organization, either intentionally or unintentionally. And obviously we're talking about private data that's not meant to be shared. And then with information protection, what we are doing is if it does get out, how do we then control that data once it's left the organization? So the quick little analogy we like to use is data loss prevention is trying our level best to keep the cat in the bag. And information protection is if the cat manages to get out of the bag, maybe even legitimately because the data needs to be shared outside of the organization as part of a work function, how do we then control who has access to that cat and what kind of interactions can they have? So underpinning those both is what we call a sensitive information type. So no 2 Purview deployments at an organization is the same. The reason being, different types of information is sensitive to different types of organizations. So an example of this, if it is a math tutoring company, they use plenty of formulas and they're public formulas. We don't need to protect that. However, if we're talking about an engineering firm all of a sudden the word formula could be IP that needs to be protected. So in the first example, we would not label that as a sensitive information type, but in an engineering firm, we might now want to start protecting that word formula. So we are going to use an example of KFC. Again, I don't know if anyone's seen this picture, but this is believed to be the original recipe for their secret Kentucky Fried Chicken. So to a normal, in a cookbook, in a cooking class, any sort of organization that trains chefs, things like thyme, basil, garlic salt's not going to be sensitive. But if KFC were to have this data sitting inside of their organization, we would want to protect this. So basically what they would do is they would create a sensitive information type, and they would group those words together as a brick, as we call these sensitive information types bricks. We then use the bricks to go and build the policies. Microsoft has a whole bunch of ones built in, so even if we just Google South Africa, you'll see that they've got things like South African ID numbers, South African addresses, telephone numbers as a sensitive information type that we can build. But we also have the ability to create our own. So just to round it off, we're not going to go through creating it, but just to give an idea of once we have that sensitive information type, what can we do? We can do things like uploading any documents that have those keywords to cloud services. A big one, ChatGPT. I think what many staff don't realize is that when you upload a document and you ask ChatGPT if it's a consumer version, obviously Copilot is protected, but if it's a consumer version, you upload company data, you say build a presentation out of this, you're explicitly giving ChatGPT the authorization to use that data to train that model, and that information could now be exposed on the internet. So we use a policy that if those words pop up, the user is not allowed to upload that data to a domain. We can stop it from being copied to a clipboard. We can stop it from being copied to removable devices, network shares, kill the ability to print, and certain options like that. So those sit in the data loss prevention part of Purview. And then we can use the same sensitive information types to go and build sensitivity labels, which protects your information once it leaves the organization. So just a quick example of some things we can do. If we want to share it, but we want to time gate the sharing, we can add a time gate to that sensitive information type. Let's say we have a marketing firm that wants to use our content to build a go-to-market platform. We can say, okay, they can access that content for a month, and after that, the access gets lost. And we can also make sure that they do not have offline access, meaning if they copy that to a flash drive and hand it to a friend, the friend will, their device cannot be offline. It needs to be online so that the data can try and authenticate to the user account that you shared it to. And if it doesn't, access to that file would be dismissed. So we hope we've been able to, in a short time, effectively demonstrate how all of these things follow, how they link into each other. We saw that Entra does the IDs, the groups, Defender's giving us telemetry on how to close holes and information on our data and our security estate. Intune is allowing us to go and close those holes and manage the devices, and Purview is protecting our data. So that ends the demo end, and I'm going to hand it back over to Gary.
Thank you very much, Richard and Luke. Guys, I think you get the impression these guys just gave you a little taste of what these products are all about, and I think we've highlighted exactly how they're all tied together and how they all work together to give you that sort of framework on underpinning your security posture and platform. Colin, I'm not sure if we have time for Q&A, but yeah, I think it's
unfortunately we're out of time, but like I said in the beginning, we were sort of expecting this because it's a massive topic, and what I'd like to encourage you guys to do, obviously, if you do have questions, email them to us or put them in the chat and we'll get back to you. But in addition to that, if you would like, I always say this, but if you'd like a session on one or two of these products specifically, and we can go into more detail, please let us know. We're always keen for ideas, and we've got a couple of these booked up for the rest of the year. But we're very happy to chuck some more in. So give us your feedback, send us your questions. With that, I'm gonna probably hand over to Sean soon. And maybe now is a good idea for you to run to your fridge. Some people might have a fridge right next to your computer. Grab your beers. Some of you, like Gary, probably have 450 beers in your fridge already, and you're going to have to shuffle through them.
They're in the front. They're in the front.
They're in the front. Clever, clever. That's I'm sure there's a metaphor for Purview there, so,
Sure.
somehow. But like I said, I hope you guys enjoyed that, and that at least some part of it taught you something new. And Sean, are you here? Are you with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
Excellent. So not to show up Gary, Richard, and Luke, but Sean is our alcohol expert and is a very good alcohol expert.